Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working at this tech company for about 6 years now, and my best friend joined the same team about 3 years ago. We quickly became close since we shared similar interests and had the same weird sense of humor. However, things got a bit complicated after her mother passed away from cancer last year. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand that losing a parent is devastating, but my friend developed this, let's call it a coping mechanism. Anytime someone would mention anything about mothers, whether it was talking about Mother's Day plans, sharing a funny story about their mom, or even just mentioning their mother in passing, she would immediately interject with, "I wouldn't know, my mom is dead." The first few times people would apologize profusely and try to comfort her, but she would just laugh it off, saying she was joking. It became her thing, but it made everyone incredibly uncomfortable. People started avoiding any mention of mothers around her, which just made workplace conversations awkward. Fast forward to this spring. I was planning a trip to India for my cousin's wedding, and it was a pretty big deal since I hadn't seen my extended family in years. I was nervous about my grandmother seeing my tattoos. In our culture, older generations tend to be quite traditional, and I had gotten several visible tattoos over the past few years. During one of our conversations about the trip, I mentioned to my coworkers that I was considering wearing long sleeves the entire time I would be there. My best friend quickly pointed out that I would probably die from the heat in India if I did that. I acknowledged she was right, but explained that my grandmother would probably have a heart attack if she saw my tattoos. My manager, trying to be helpful, suggested that I could try using tattoo cover-up products instead. We had been having these conversations for weeks, brainstorming ways to handle the situation. But then, everything changed. One night, I received the devastating news that my grandmother had suddenly passed away. It was completely unexpected, and my whole family was in shock. We spent the entire night trying to book the fastest flight possible for my mom so she could get to India to be with her siblings. After only 4 hours of sleep, I drove my mom to the airport at dawn. My brother and I then grabbed breakfast together, both of us trying to process what had happened. Instead of going back home to an empty house, I decided to go to work. I just needed some sense of normalcy, you know? When I got to work, I sat between my manager's and best friend's cubicles. They were the only ones who knew about my grandmother's passing at that point, and we were discussing whether I could use bereavement leave for some of my planned trip days. That's when my best friend, completely forgetting about the news I had shared just hours earlier, asked me what I was planning to do about my tattoos when I saw my grandmother. I felt a strange mix of emotions in that moment. Grief, obviously, but also a sudden urge to give her a taste of her own medicine. I turned to her with the brightest smile I could muster and asked her if she meant my grandmother who had just died last night. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened and closed a few times without any words coming out. My manager tried to suppress a laugh but failed miserably. My best friend started apologizing profusely, saying she had completely forgotten and that she was being insensitive. I pointed out that this was how everyone felt when she made her mom jokes. She tried to argue that it was different, but when I questioned how it was different, she couldn't really explain. After a moment of processing what had happened, she finally admitted that I had gotten her good and that she probably deserved it. My manager agreed, saying she definitely deserved it. Since that day, she significantly reduced her "my mom is dead" comments at work. Sometimes when she starts to make one, she'll catch my eye and stop herself. Occasionally, when she does let one slip, I just raise my eyebrows and say my grandmother who died very quietly, and she immediately backs down. I know it might seem a bit harsh, but sometimes people need to experience how their actions affect others to truly understand. While I genuinely sympathize with her loss, using it to make others uncomfortable wasn't healthy for anyone. These days, we can actually have normal conversations about family without anyone feeling like they need to walk on eggshells. Just last week, someone was talking about their mother's birthday plans, and for the first time in over a year, my best friend just smiled and asked them what they were planning to do. Progress, right? My husband and I moved into our new house about 6 months ago. It's a beautiful place with a decent-sized backyard and a pool, which was perfect for our three kids aged 8, 10, and 12. We'd saved up for years to afford this place, and the pool was a major selling point since our kids are competitive swimmers. Everything was great for the first few months. The kids would practice their swimming after school, and on weekends we'd have small pool parties with their friends. That's when our next-door neighbor started showing her true colors. She was a woman in her 50s who lived alone and worked from home. At first, she seemed nice enough, giving us a somewhat forced smile when we moved in. But things started going downhill when summer began and the kids spent more time in the pool. One afternoon while I was supervising the kids' swimming practice, she came to our fence. She asked us to keep the noise down, claiming she was trying to work. I apologized and explained that the kids were just practicing their swimming. She complained that she worked from home and couldn't concentrate with all the splashing and screaming. I told her they weren't screaming, just having fun, but promised to ask them to try to keep it down. I did ask the kids to be mindful of the noise, but they're children. They get excited when they're playing. We weren't violating any noise ordinances, and it was always during reasonable hours between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Over the next few weeks, she kept coming to complain. Each time her tone got more aggressive. She started recording videos of our kids swimming, claiming she was documenting the disturbance. I told her to stop recording our children immediately or I'd call the police. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling about how we thought we owned the neighborhood and how she'd lived there for 20 years and never had such inconsiderate neighbors. I told her to stop harassing us and reminded her that the kids were allowed to swim in their own pool. She ominously warned that we'd see about that. I should have taken that threat more seriously. I installed security cameras around our property after that incident just to be safe. Thank God I did. Last Tuesday, I was in the kitchen preparing snacks while the kids were having their usual afternoon swim. Suddenly I heard screaming, not the usual playing sounds, but genuine terror. I ran outside and saw my children scrambling to get out of the pool, crying and panicking. That's when I saw her. Karen was standing at the edge of our pool with an empty bucket, and there were electric eels swimming in our pool. Electric eels! She had literally dumped dangerous creatures into a pool with children. I screamed at her, demanding to know what she'd done and telling her to get away from my children. She just sneered and said she'd warned us about the noise and now we'd learn to respect our neighbors. I rushed my kids inside and called 911 immediately. When the police arrived, Karen had already gone back to her house, but I had everything on camera. The footage clearly showed her breaking into our backyard through a loose board in the fence and dumping the eels into the pool. The police were horrified when they saw the footage. They called animal control to deal with the eels while they went to arrest Karen. She actually tried to justify her actions to the officers, claiming that we deserved it because we'd been torturing her with noise for months and she had to do something. The officer told her that she was under arrest for breaking and entering, endangering minors, and attempted assault with a dangerous weapon. She kept screaming about her rights as they took her away in handcuffs. Turns out she had ordered the electric eels online from some exotic pet supplier. The police found the shipping receipts in her house proving this was completely premeditated. The district attorney is pressing serious charges. She's looking at significant jail time, especially since she deliberately targeted children. The exotic pet supplier is also under investigation because apparently it's illegal to ship electric eels to private residences in our state. My kids were traumatized for a few weeks, but they're doing better now with counseling. We've installed better security around the property, and the neighbors on our other side have been incredibly supportive. They told us that Karen had driven away their previous neighbors too with her harassment, though she had never done anything this extreme before. The house next door is now up for sale. Turns out it wasn't even her house, she was renting it, and her landlord evicted her immediately after learning what happened. I heard that she's also being sued by her employer because she lost an important client call during her arrest, and now she's trying to blame us for that too. The local swimming club heard about what happened and offered my kids free membership and coaching for a year to help them get past their newfound fear of water. They're slowly getting comfortable in the pool again, and now they have professional coaching to boot. Sometimes I still can't believe this actually happened. Who dumps electric eels into a pool with children because they're playing too loudly? The court date is set for next month, and from what our lawyer tells us, she's probably going to serve time for this. Good riddance. My daughter had been spending more time at her school friend's house lately. The parents were migrants from the same country as my partner, but unlike my partner who had fully embraced our local culture and understood social boundaries, they still held onto some of their cultural habits, including being extremely inquisitive about personal matters. I'd met them a handful of times before. We knew the basics about each other, our jobs, names, and such, but we weren't close friends by any means. They seemed nice enough, though my daughter had mentioned that the mother was quite nosy and overprotective of her daughter. That day, I went to pick up my daughter after she spent the afternoon at their house. As soon as I arrived, the mother greeted me at the door and immediately offered me tea and something to eat. I politely declined, but she insisted, saying they had plenty of food left from lunch. I had to explain that I was fasting. Her eyes lit up with curiosity. In their culture, fasting was usually associated with religious occasions, so seeing a white guy like me fasting probably sparked her interest. She asked why I was fasting, and I explained it was for a minor medical procedure. She seemed concerned and asked if I was okay, so I reassured her it was nothing serious, just a routine procedure that I'd done before. But she wouldn't let it go. She pressed for more details, asking what procedure it was and which hospital I was using. I tried my best to be evasive, hoping she'd pick up on the hints that I didn't want to discuss it. But she was relentless. Finally, I told her it was a colonoscopy at my gastroenterologist's office. Surely she knew what a colonoscopy was and would stop asking questions, but oh no, she just had to know more, asking me to explain what a colonoscopy was. At this point, I decided to give her exactly what she asked for. She wanted details. She'd get details. I launched into a detailed explanation of how they insert a camera up my butt, attached to a long cord that goes all the way up my lower intestine. I described how the doctor uses it to take photos and detect abnormalities, mentioning that while that part was fine because I'd be sedated, the worst part was the night before. I made sure to include the graphic details about drinking liquid that induces diarrhea to completely empty my bowels for the camera. The color drained from her face faster than water down a drain. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. She mumbled something about getting my daughter and practically ran into the house. When my daughter came out, her mother was nowhere to be seen. Her daughter showed us to the door and said goodbye. Once we got in the car, I couldn't contain my amusement. I asked my daughter if she wanted to hear what her friend's mom had just asked me. After telling her the whole story, she burst out laughing. She said it served her right, calling her a nosy cow who was always helicoptering around her daughter and asking too many personal questions. I heard through my daughter later that her friend's mother couldn't look me in the eye the next time she saw me at a school event. She kept her distance and, more importantly, stopped asking my daughter personal questions during her visits. I'm a second-year medical student, and between tuition, books, and living expenses, money's always tight. I worked as a barista over the summer to save up some extra cash, and my parents help when they can, but I still need to be careful with every dollar. That's why I decided to get a roommate to split the rent on my small 2-bedroom apartment near campus. Everything seemed fine at first. My roommate was a paralegal at a local law firm, always paid their share of the bills on time, and we got along well enough. We weren't best friends or anything, but we respected each other's space and had a decent living arrangement. That all changed last month when I got a check from my parents to help cover some unexpected dental work. The check was for $1,115, and I left it on my desk, planning to deposit it the next day after my morning classes. Big mistake. When I came back home, the check was still there, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but when I looked closer, I noticed some subtle alterations. The payee name had been changed to my roommate's name. They had somehow managed to modify the check without making it obvious at first look. I confronted them as soon as they got home. I asked them what they had done to the check my parents sent me. They acted casual about it, saying they just borrowed it for a bit because they were short on money this month, promising to pay me back soon. When I pointed out that altering a check that wasn't theirs was illegal, they told me not to be dramatic, arguing that since we lived together and they'd always paid their share of everything, it was fine to take what they called a temporary loan. I told them this wasn't a loan but theft and that they had committed check fraud. They brushed off my concerns, saying I was making it into a bigger deal than necessary. They even had the nerve to mention that my parents were well off and that I'd get the money back eventually, asking what the problem was. They acted like they had done nothing wrong, like altering someone else's check was perfectly normal. I immediately called my bank to report the fraud and showed them the text messages where my roommate admitted to altering the check. The bank reversed the transaction, but my roommate's attitude only got worse. They called me petty, repeating their promise to pay it back. When I explained that their intention to repay didn't matter because they had committed a crime, they dismissed me, saying I had gotten my precious money back and should just let it go. But I couldn't just let it go. I contacted the police and an officer told me I could file a formal complaint with the Financial Crimes Unit. When I mentioned this to my roommate, they laughed it off. They mockingly asked if I was really going to press charges over what they called a little borrowed money that I had already gotten back, sarcastically wishing me good luck. When I tried to make them understand how serious this was by pointing out it was a felony, they accused me of being vindictive, claiming nobody got hurt. That was the last straw. I filed a formal complaint with the Financial Crimes Unit and provided all the evidence, including the text messages. Turns out check fraud is taken very seriously, especially when the perpetrator shows no remorse. The prosecutor's office decided to pursue the case. My roommate's face when they got served with felony check fraud charges was insane. Suddenly, they weren't so smug anymore. Their employer, the law firm, found out about the charges and suspended them pending investigation. Last I heard, they're facing possible jail time and will likely lose their job. They've been sending me desperate messages begging me to drop the charges, saying it will ruin their career. But as I told the detective handling the case, someone working in the legal field should know better than to commit check fraud, and should definitely understand why it's wrong. I've since moved out and found a new place to live. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far by pressing charges, but then I remember how casually they violated my trust and broke the law, and how they showed absolutely no remorse until they faced consequences. Maybe now they'll think twice before borrowing someone else's money without a permission. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.